Hey there, this is an incredible 3-day story called My Wife Found a Book in the Woods. Now she's acting strange. So lay back and enjoy. Before we start, I have to admit that this is one of the better stories I have read. Let's dive into it. Day 1. Fiona leaned back in her seat and put her feet up on the dashboard. I glanced at her nervously and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. That isn't very safe, I muttered. My wife rolled her eyes. I trust you, she said dryly. You don't have to control everything I do. I gritted my teeth and focused on the road. I didn't want to start another fight, not this weekend. This weekend was supposed to be about saving our marriage, not dragging it down even more. We weren't even to the cabin yet. If we couldn't make it 3 days alone together without killing each other, how could I expect us to keep going? Thankfully, we made it to the cabin without my wife's knees being shot through her skull in a horrible accident, and she seemed to be in good spirits as we got out of the car. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the little cabin, and the look of childlike wonder on my wife's face reminded me why I had married her all those years ago. It came with an aching regret, however, as it had been a while since she had directed that much joy at me. I hoped this weekend could change that. What do you want to do first? I asked as I placed our bags of food on the kitchen island, but she ignored me and made a beeline down the hallway. This place is so cute, she squealed from across the cabin. I picked the suitcase up and followed the sound of her voice to the bedroom. She was kneeling on the floor in front of the TV. They have a lot of movies, but I don't think I want to watch any of them, she said somewhat sullenly. We didn't come here to watch movies anyway, I pointed out. She stood up and walked into a little nook in the corner of the room, just big enough for a small writing desk and a chair. The desk had a small basket filled with notebooks and travel guides sitting on one side. I just wanted to look, she said. Maybe it'd be fun to watch a scary movie while we're in a cabin in the woods. I ran my hand through my hair and sighed. At some point in our marriage, simple conversation had stopped being so simple. What's in the basket? I asked, trying to change the subject. She rifled through it, picking up one of the notebooks and flipping it open. It looks like notes from guests who have stayed over the years. Oh, look, these people left a picture of their dogs. She shoved the open book in my face so I could see the small photograph of 2 huskies. Nice, I replied. Hopefully we can write something nice about our stay, too, she said wistfully, flipping through the pages. Feeling the good mood slipping away, I tried to pivot. Let's explore a little while it's still light out. It's not raining very hard, and I bet there are some neat rocks down by the river. Her face lit up again and she stood quickly, pushing past me back towards the living room. I followed before she got too far away from me and grabbed her hand as she stepped onto the back deck. She glanced back at me and smiled. I'm glad we came here, I told her. She squeezed my hand in reply. We walked down the trail into the trees. It wasn't far from the river, and we were soon at the rocky bank. Fiona let go of my hand and ran ahead, stopping at the edge of the water. I love it here, she said softly, looking at me over her shoulder. Her hair was damp from the rain and clung to her face. In that moment, she was every bit as beautiful to me as the day we first met, and all those years of distance and fighting melted away. I closed the distance between us and brought her into my arms. She began to protest but quickly sank against my chest, wrapping her arms around me and laying her head on my shoulder. We stood embracing for a few moments, the sounds of nature surrounding us, and I felt hopeful that things would work out after all. What's that? She asked suddenly, pulling away from me and walking back towards the trees. I followed dutifully, unable to see anything out of the ordinary myself. She knelt down once we got back into the woods and pushed the leaves of a fern aside. On the ground beneath them was a small, leather-bound book. How could you possibly see that from the river? I asked, incredulous. She glanced up at me. I don't know, I just did, she responded crossly. Picking up the book, she wrinkled her nose. It's wet. It has been raining for at least a week. I'm surprised it's not in worse shape. Maybe it hasn't been out here very long. Let's take it back inside and see what it says. I opened my mouth to argue, wanting to recapture what we'd been feeling before she found the book, but something in her face stopped me. Once Fiona made up her mind on something, there was no changing it. We kicked off our muddy shoes at the door, and my wife settled in on the sofa. I turned on the electric fireplace and grabbed one of the big, fluffy towels from the shelf in the bathroom. Maybe if I dried her hair for her, it could lead to a more sensual connection. Fiona sat with her feet under her, the book open in her lap. She didn't move when I walked back into the room and sat down next to her. I cleared my throat and held the towel towards her, smiling. She looked up at me absently and took the towel out of my hands. "Thanks," she said distantly, placing the towel on the back of the sofa next to her, immediately forgotten. I felt my hopes of intimacy shatter. "This is weird," she said, more to herself than to me. "This book doesn't make any sense." She turned it to show me, flipping through pages slowly before I had a chance to say anything. The pages looked worn and burnt on the edges, and many of them were stained with large, reddish-brown spots. Every page was filled with symbols I had never seen before and peppered with grotesque drawings of flayed bodies and horned monsters. I frowned. It's obviously some hipster art thing or some sort of prank. Let's put it down and spend some time. She pulled the book back into her lap and threw up a hand to silence me. I want to keep looking at it. I like it. I rolled my eyes. You like it? It's disgusting. And you can't even read any of it. Come on. Put it down and let me dry your hair for you. I said no, Mark, she said roughly, glaring at me. And I can read some of it. The last page here is in English. See? She thrust the book towards me again, but I stood up and moved away. At this point, I didn't want anything to do with the stupid thing. I don't care, Fiona. We came here to spend time together and try to reconnect, not to read some weird old book. She ignored me and began reading from the book. When darkness overtakes the day, that's when OL Gugu likes to play. Teeth so sharp, eyes so red. If you see him, you're good as dead. Yeah, that's awful spooky, I said sarcastically. I'm going to make dinner. You're welcome to join me if you can tear yourself away from your ghost story. I don't think it's a ghost, she said quietly, again more to herself than to me. I think OL Gugu is something else. I wish I could understand the rest of this. To her credit, Fiona did finally tear herself away from the book when I put dinner on the table. She even managed to contribute more than one-word answers to the conversation, and she helped clear the plates when we were done. It seemed that maybe the weekend wasn't completely ruined. After dinner, we retired to the bedroom, and as she sat on the edge of the bed brushing out her hair, I mulled over how to get the evening back on track. Suddenly, my wife froze with the brush against her hair and cocked her head. Listen to that. Do you hear that? What is that noise? I looked up from my phone and paused, but I didn't hear anything unusual. All I hear is the rain. She frowned and shook her head. No, she said, standing and walking to the window over the writing desk. It's not quite rain. It's something else. Listen. I listened again, but all I heard was the dripping of rain, the running of water, and the occasional cracking of a tree branch. I don't. It's not rain, she insisted. It's like licking or slurping, and sometimes there's a crunching sound. I sighed and pulled her into my arms. It's rain. You're not used to hearing it in the trees, babe. That book got you all worked up. I pushed hair out of her face and cupped her cheek. Let's lay down. Maybe we can watch a movie. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes full of concern, and I silently begged her to let it go. For once, I got my wish. She smiled a little and pulled a movie off the shelf, holding it up enthusiastically for me to see. You really want to watch a movie about people getting lost in haunted woods right now? I asked, laughing. It's atmospheric, she responded, putting the disc in the player and pressing play. I was about to protest, but she snuggled up against me and put her head on my chest. So I shut my mouth and settled in to enjoy the downfall of college film students. Once the movie ended, the cabin returned to its silent state, and my wife stiffened against me. I still hear the noises, she whimpered. I pulled her closer, trying to mask my frustration and exude comfort instead. It's just the rain, I muttered, kissing the top of her head. Let's go to bed. She got up and walked to the window over the desk, staring out. she gasped. There's something standing at the river, she whispered, horrified. I sighed again and walked over to stand behind her. I squinted and looked out the window, but nothing seemed amiss. I don't see anything, I told her, running my hands down her arms. Let's get back in bed and… Look, she demanded, pointing. It's right there. It's like a man, but with horns or something. And wings. I closed the curtains and turned her to look at me. You're letting your imagination get the best of you. Come on, let's go to bed. I promise I can take your mind off of it. Her eyes darted around, but she seemed to be considering my proposal. After a moment, she bit her lower lip thoughtfully. Okay, she acquiesced. But just give me a minute. I want to write about this in the guest book first. So if someone else hears it, they know they aren't crazy. I threw up my hands. Fine. 5 minutes to write. Then I want you over here with me. She smiled coyly and bit her lip again, this time conveying a different intent. She wrote her bit, and then she delivered as promised. Maybe this weekend wouldn't be so bad after all. Outside, the rain didn't stop. As I drifted off to sleep with my wife in my arms, I thought that maybe it did sound a little bit like licking. This concludes day 1. Welcome to day 2. Of my wife found a book in the woods. Now she's acting strange. Let's sieve in. Our first morning in the cabin. I woke up feeling remarkably refreshed. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and I slept like a rock. Fiona was no longer next to me, but the curtains were open and so was the bedroom door. So I lazily made my way into the living area to greet her. She was sitting on the sofa, hugging her knees to her chest, staring vacantly out the window towards the river. I kissed the top of her head. Morning, babe. Did you make any coffee? She ignored me and continued staring out at the river. I sighed and went into the kitchen. The high note we ended the evening before on had clearly dropped away, and I wasn't caffeinated enough for damage control yet. I started a pot of coffee and put some English muffins in the toaster. I turned around and jumped, nearly dropping my mug. Fiona was standing a few feet away from me, staring blankly at me. I took a deep breath. I didn't hear you come in. You startled. Why did you open all of the curtains? She demanded. I blinked, confused. What? The curtains, Mark? She replied in an exasperated tone. They were all closed when we went to bed. Why did you open them? I just got up. You woke up before me. Are you sure they were closed when we went to bed? Yes, Mark, they were closed. You closed the one in the bedroom. They were closed. When I woke up, they were open. I pinched the bridge of my nose between my finger and thumb, silently willing the coffee to brew faster. Fiona, I didn't open them, she cried, her voice rising, tears forming in her eyes. Please tell me why you opened them. Why? I put my mug on the counter and drew her into my arms. She began to sob into my chest. Hey, I said softly. It's okay. You're okay. Maybe you were sleepwalking again? I know you haven't in years, but we're somewhere unfamiliar, so… She cried harder and shook her head against me. I saw him, she said, her voice muffled. I took a step back and smoothed her hair out of her face. Saw who? I saw him. In the bedroom. He was watching me. I was really struggling to hide my frustration at this point, but I tried to maintain a calm front to keep things under control. I don't know what you're talking about, babe. Who was watching you? Nobody is here but us. Fiona glared at me, her eyes wet and sparkling. I know what I saw. A huge figure with horns and wings was in our bedroom last night, in the nook by the desk. He was staring at me. He was there all night. He knows I read his book. It sounds like you were dreaming, which would make sense with the curtains. It wasn't a dream, she insisted. He was here. He knows. He's watching me. Who, Fiona? Who even knows where we are? I exclaimed, throwing my hands up. Oh, El Gugu, she screamed, her face red. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing hysterically. I felt a familiar anger building inside of me. She hadn't been this unstable in years. It was like all of our progress together was gone in a flash. Blood boiling, I spun away from her and marched into the living room. I knew what needed to be done. The book from the woods sat open on the coffee table, strange symbols covering its pages. The reddish spots looked suspiciously like blood, but I knew they were probably ink. The whole thing had to be fabricated as a prank, and I wasn't about to let someone's artistic vision get in the way of fixing my marriage. I reached out to grab the book, intending to throw it away, but before I could touch it, my wife's small hand closed around my wrist. "Don't you dare," she hissed. I looked at her in surprise. "Where did you even come from? How did you get over here so fast?" "The book stays with me," she said severely. "Fiona." She smiled, but it looked forced and a bit insane, and her voice was strained when she spoke again. "It's fine. I'm fine. Please don't take the book from me. I like it." I pulled my hand back to my side, and she visibly relaxed as I moved farther away from the book. I heard the toaster pop up in the kitchen, and the coffee was bubbling away. "I don't know what to do, Fiona," I said gently. "I'm worried about you." "I'm fine. I just didn't sleep very well." "You were right, I must have been dreaming last night. I'll be happy the rest of the weekend. Okay? I promise." She put her hands on my shoulders and gave me a peck on the lips, clearly trying her best to ease my mind, but it wasn't really working. Her mood swings were pretty rapid and severe, and it seemed like getting back to the city might be the best thing to do. "I don't want to leave," she said softly, as if she read my thoughts. "I like it here. I want to stay here with you. Let's go in the hot tub today. Let's have a fun day together." I hesitated again. "Are you sure you're okay?" She smiled again. This one looked a little more sincere but weaker. "Trust me, I've never been better." She took the book from the table, cradling it protectively to her chest, and disappeared down the hallway, shutting the bedroom door behind her. I ran my hand through my hair and sighed before returning to the kitchen for my coffee and muffin. I had thought after the way the night before had ended that things would go better, but now I felt any hope of this weekend helping us reconnect slipping away. Those hopes bubbled back to life a couple of hours later when she emerged from the bedroom wearing a small red bikini and grinning mischievously. I considered bringing up her behavior from that morning, but as she brought my swimming trunks out from behind her back and dangled them in front of me, I decided it was against my better judgment and quickly changed into them before joining her in the hot tub on the back deck. The rain hadn't stopped, but the deck was covered, and despite the chilly fall air, the hot tub was warm and relaxing. We turned on the jets and sat staring out at the woods and river, enjoying each other's company in silence. I was starting to forget about her strange outbursts and that stupid book and remembering what we really came here for. "I love you. You know that, right?" I said after a bit, looking down at her snuggled against me. She smiled but didn't make eye contact, still staring down towards the river. "Of course I do. And I haven't given up on us. I think we..." She sat up sharply, nearly elbowing me in the chest as she did. "Did you see that?" My stomach dropped. Why did it feel like I was constantly spinning my wheels? "I didn't see anything. Fiona, I'm trying to talk to you about our..." She stood suddenly, splashing water over the edges of the tub, goosebumps forming on her exposed skin as the cool air connected with her. "Shut up. There's something running through the trees." She was moving further away from me, both literally and figuratively. I reached out and grabbed her hand, trying to pull her back. "It's probably a bird or a deer or something. Come sit back down. I want to talk to you." "I'm scared, Mark. It's getting closer. Let's go inside," she said absently, pulling away again and climbing out of the hot tub. She was slamming the glass door behind her before I even had a chance to reply. I sighed and followed her inside. Fiona's mood improved once we were inside, and she even let me dry her off with one of the big towels from the bathroom. But anytime I tried to bring the conversation back around to our relationship, she shut me down again. I finally gave up and tried my best to enjoy the evening with her. We played a few board games and I cooked dinner for her. After the sun went down, things got worse. "Do you hear that?" she said, looking up from the game board between us. I sighed. Things had been going so much better. "It's just the rain." "No, not that," she said insistently. "I mean, yes, the licking noise is back too, but listen, there's something else." I closed my eyes and listened, then opened them again and looked at her evenly. What am I supposed to be hearing now? She stood up and walked towards the back door. It sounds like chanting. Can't you hear it? I followed her and wrapped my arms around her waist from behind. Yeah? What are they saying? Let me guess. They're calling out for OL Gugu. She turned her head and glared at me. I don't appreciate being made fun of, Mark. Do you hear anything or not? It sounds like a different language. I listened again, and I thought I could hear some faint music in the distance. It's probably just someone's stereo at another cabin. It is not. This isn't music. And, look, do you see the red lights out there in the woods? I looked, but I saw nothing as I expected. I reached around her and closed the curtains over the door, then bent and kissed her neck gently. Let's go to bed, I murmured against her skin. She pushed me away. You don't believe me. Something really weird is going on here and you don't even care. I sighed. Of course I care. Care about you. I just want you to be safe and happy. She whirled around, eyes wild. Then listen to me. Something is out there, and it's watching me. I closed the curtains on the living room window and gently led her down the hall to the bedroom. I won't let anything happen to us. Okay? I'll take care of you. We'll go home tomorrow morning, and everything will be fine. Don't you trust me? She sat at the desk and looked out into the woods one last time before closing the curtains and picking up the cabin guest book, clearly planning to write another warning to the future guests. Yeah, she said softly, unconvincingly. I trust you. This concludes day 2. Let's dive into the last part of my wife found a book in the woods. Now she's acting strange day 3. I woke up in the middle of the night and found the bed empty. The room was illuminated by dim moonlight, muted by the clouds and ever-present rain. Fiona had opened the curtains again, even though we closed them before bed at her very frantic insistence. I strained my eyes to find her in the eerie, uneven light, but my wife was not in the bedroom. Fiona, I called out as I got out of bed. Normally I just assumed she was in the bathroom, but with how she'd been acting this weekend, something told me I needed to find her. I walked into the living room and found it empty, but the door to the back deck was wide open. I grabbed my jacket and went outside, panic building inside my chest. I called out for my wife again, and then in a flash of lightning I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the river, facing away from me. Her hair was hanging wet down her bare back, and I quickly realized she was naked. It was pouring rain and probably 40 degrees out there. What was she thinking? I approached her cautiously, calling her name every few moments. But either she couldn't hear me over the rain and the rushing river, or she was ignoring me. When I finally reached her, I saw she was covered with something slick and dark and viscous. I reached out and grabbed her shoulder. Fiona spun around so fast that I nearly fell over. Her front was covered with the same dark slickness, and she had a blank expression on her face. She was completely naked other than a strange necklace around her neck that I had never seen before. It looked like a small bottle with some sort of winged creature embossed on it. I leaned in closer and reached out my hand, trying to get a better look, but when I touched the necklace, my wife let out an inhuman snarl and pulled back. Fiona, I said quietly, reaching out for her again, careful to avoid the necklace. Come on, babe, let's go back inside. She wouldn't budge. I begged, pleaded, and pulled, but she stayed unmoving and staring blankly at me. After several moments, I decided I would just have to carry her inside. As I wrapped my arms around her to pick her up, however, I realized that she had not been staring at me. She was staring at something behind me. Terror washed over me. I didn't want to turn around. I knew my wife was losing her mind, but on the off chance that she wasn't, I didn't want to see what she was seeing. However, I was left with a choice. We couldn't stand out in the rain forever. Fiona was having some sort of psychotic break, and I knew I needed to get her back to the city to get some help. "OL Gugu," she suddenly whispered, her voice filled with a surprising warmth. In response, I heard a low growl come from the trees behind me. That was enough for me. I turned and ran back towards the cabin, leaving my wife at the riverbank. It certainly wasn't my proudest moment, but my fight or flight kicked in. Once I got back to the cabin, I could come up with a plan to get my wife back inside. The only thing that I cared about in that moment was getting out of the darkness and the rain and the weirdness. I ran up the rocky beach and back towards the woods. In my frenzy, I hardly noticed the figure standing in the treeline, but its glowing red eyes were impossible to miss. I raced through the trees and tried my best to follow the muddy path back to the cabin. I was vaguely aware of the sound of something crashing through the woods behind me, and I picked up speed, slipping and stumbling as I made it back to the deck. I quickly ran back into the cabin. As I turned back to lock the door, I saw what my wife had been so afraid of all weekend, what I had refused to believe was real. He was nearly 7 feet tall and looked vaguely human, but he had long, pointed horns and huge, leathery wings, and his torso and thighs were covered with grayish fur. His arms and legs ended in long, sharp claws. The same dark, slick liquid that had been covering my wife dripped from his mouth. His eyes glowed a menacing red. The rhyme from that stupid book my wife found echoed through my head. When darkness overtakes the day, that's when OL Gugu likes to play. Teeth so sharp, eyes so red. If you see him, you're good as dead. I turned and grabbed my keys from the table and flew through the front door. Screw my wife. She could stay out there and frolic naked with the gargoyle demon forever for all I cared. I wasn't going to stick around and have my soul devoured. I jumped into the car and peeled out of the driveway like a bat out of hell. Unfortunately, it would appear that a more literal bat out of hell was right behind me. I saw the glowing red eyes appear in my rear view almost immediately. I picked up speed, careening dangerously on the wet dirt road as my wipers strained to keep up with the torrential rain. There were a few narrow, wooden bridges between myself and the highway that I wasn't too sure about, but there was no way I was stopping now. The creature was having no trouble keeping up with me, so when I got to the first bridge, I picked up speed, flying past the 5 p.m. sign posted and praying I stayed straight. I lost my side mirror to the railing as I exited, but I made it across. Adrenaline flowed through me as I sped away. The second bridge was going to be a bit trickier, as it was even more narrow and significantly longer than the first. It crossed the entire span of the Skykomish River and was barely wide enough for the car to fit on as it was. My heart beat wildly as I approached it, but I didn't slow down. As my front tires hit the bridge, my headlights went out. I panicked, flipping switches and hitting buttons, but nothing helped. The bridge was under me now, but I couldn't see a foot in front of me or to either side. I looked in the rear view again and noticed that the red eyes were no longer behind me. Without the threat immediately behind me, I slowed down a little. I was unable to see where I was, but I guessed I was about halfway across the bridge. Suddenly, the whole car shook as something heavy landed on the roof. I screamed before I could stop myself, but managed to keep the car on a straight path. I pressed the gas pedal down a little harder and prayed. My headlights came back on in an instant. The bridge was illuminated in front of me, but at its end stood OL Gugu, staring straight at me. He was only a couple of yards away and I was approaching fast. Instinctually, I turned the wheel hard to the right. At the speed I was going, that was all it took to send me through the wooden railing and towards the river below. In the next several moments, time slowed down. I thought about my wife, about the things she had been saying, begging me to believe all weekend long. If I had listened to her from the beginning, would things be different now? Sudden clarity overtook me, and I nearly laughed. Where was that realization before our marriage started falling apart to begin with? The river was approaching faster now, and I braced for impact, the image of my wife with her feet on the dashboard filling my mind. "I trust you," she had said then, and again once more last night. If only I had trusted her in return. The river was swollen and raging from all the rain, and the car was under the rapids in seconds. There was nothing I could do. As the cab filled with water, I looked up through the murky darkness and saw the faint glow of 2 red eyes moving steadily towards me.